Welcome, beautiful soul. You're safe here now. Let the weight of the day melt away. This is your time to rest, to breathe, to feel held. You're not alone. You're gently wrapped in warmth, in quiet, in love. Close your eyes and let this story be your lullaby. This one is called The Bookstore Where I Loved You. Rain clings to your coat as you step inside, shoulders hunched, the cold still clinging to your spine. Outside, the streets are glossy with puddles, headlights stretching into watercolor blurs. But in here, it smells of ink and paper and something toasted. Perhaps a candle, maybe just memory. You pause, letting the door sigh shut behind you. The sound of it, that soft creak and thunk, is exactly the same as it was back then. You never come in for anything in particular. That's not why people like us haunt old bookstores. It's not about the book we think we'll find. It's about what we've already lost in the pages. Your boots squeak a little as you move past the display of new releases no one actually buys. Some poor author's debut novel sits under a staff pick sign, and you wonder if anyone has ever really picked it. You used to laugh about things like that with them, how earnest bookstores were, like golden retrievers in cardigan form, all wide-eyed and hopeful and a little musty. There's the poetry shelf, still in the corner under the cracked light bulb. That bulb's been flickering since the first time you came in. You used to joke that it was romantic. In a way ghosts might be romantic. Flickering light, dusty air, the chance someone might brush your sleeve as they passed. And you'd never quite be sure if it happened. You remember the first time you saw them. Not in vivid cinematic detail like movies try to sell you. No, more like a whisper of light. A pair of hands reaching for a Rilke collection. That's it. No orchestra swell, no fireworks. Just hands, a soft sleeve brushing yours, and a quiet sorry followed by the kind of smile that pauses time. That day, it was raining too. Not a coincidence. That bookstore seems to exist only in the rain. You'd never see it in sunlight. It would vanish, its magic sucked out under blue skies and common brightness. You remember the table by the window. You sat there with your coffee while they browsed. They made a little stack, poetry, essays, a battered, used novel with notes in the margins. You watched them carry it like treasure. You couldn't help yourself. You asked what they were reading. They turned, startled, then smiled like they were letting you in on something secret. That's how it started. With rain, a shared glance, and a question neither of you quite meant to ask. Now you move toward the window again, the old boards creaking under your weight like they recognize you. The table is empty. There's a stain from someone's overfilled mug. The mug used to be yours. You sit without meaning to, and the chair makes that familiar half sigh. everything here is the same, except you. You watch the rain slide down the glass in long, lazy lines. It's the kind of weather that makes people remember things. Ex-lovers, childhood bike rides, the smell of soup when someone used to wait up for you. You wonder if they remember too, wherever they are. You wonder if they ever drive past this bookstore and glance at it out the corner of their eye, just to make sure it's still standing. You open a book, not because you plan to buy it, but because it feels right. Your fingers graze the pages. They're rougher than you expect, like maybe the story inside is older than the book itself. You think about how they used to trace words with their fingers, like the sentences were braille, like meaning could be felt more than understood. There's a new kid working today, young, earbuds in, mouthing the lyrics to something upbeat and tragically out of place. You wonder if they even know the weight of this place, the stories that live between its shelves, the ghosts of people who sat just like you, remembering people just like them. The bell over the door jingles. Someone walks in. You look up, foolishly, even though you know it's not them. It never is. But for a split second, before your brain catches up, your heart does something reckless. It leaps. It imagines. It remembers. You shake it off, grounded, slow. Go back to the book. Read a line about memory being both shelter and storm. Fitting. You could stay here for hours and still not be sure if you feel safe or soaked to the bone. You turn another page, and there, scrawled in pencil in the margin, is a note. It's not their handwriting, but it says something familiar. You are not hard to love. You close the book gently. You still remember the book. It was small, dog-eared, a soft green cover with faded gold lettering. Letters to a young poet. Of course it was. Everyone falls in love with Rilke at some point. And you happened to do it while someone else did too. That moment, your hand and theirs brushing as you both reached, was not cinematic. No. It was quieter. It was the kind of moment that doesn't need witnesses, because it wouldn't make sense to anyone else. They looked up at you with that slightly startled smile, a little lopsided, a little tired. You could see they'd had the kind of day that frays your edges. But they still smiled. And when you pulled your hand back and gestured, "Please, you first," they laughed like you'd just handed them a poem. You didn't ask their name right away. That came later. First came the back and forth visits, the wordless negotiations over shelf space, the small comments passed like notes during class. That one's overrated. You just haven't read it at the right time. Fair. The kind of banter that felt like foreplay, or maybe prayer. You started timing your visits without realizing. Tuesdays, mostly. Rainy ones especially. You'd walk the aisles, pretending to browse while your heart held its breath, waiting for their shape to appear between the shelves. And then they'd be there, already halfway through a poem, a pen in hand, probably underlining something you'd pretend you weren't going to ask about later. Reverent, you remember the first time they showed you one of the books they wrote in. It felt like being handed a diary, a key, a hand-carved map of their mind. There were arrows, stars, tiny notes like breadcrumbs. Read again after 3 a.m. This one feels like standing in the sea. You wanted to frame those pages or memorize them. They let you borrow it. That little book, weathered and worn, with their handwriting inside. You took it home and didn't read it right away. You held it in your lap like a living thing. You fell asleep with it next to you, like it might hum in the night and whisper their thoughts into your dreams. And when you did read it, slowly, carefully, as if each page might bruise, you saw something that made you stop. Next to a passage about love being patient, they had written, "I think I could be patient with you." Your breath caught. You closed the book, opened it again. The words were still there. It felt like a secret message, one not meant to be seen, or maybe one that desperately was. The next time you saw them, you didn't say anything. You just handed the book back, and your fingers touched longer than necessary. They noticed. Their eyes flicked to yours, searching for something. You gave them a half smile and said, "You take good notes." They laughed, looked down, then, softly, "I meant it." You didn't move. The rain was tapping at the windows like a nervous guest. The store felt too quiet. You heard the soft tick of the wall clock. Somewhere, a page turned. You said, "I know." That was the first time they kissed you. Not in the aisles, not in the dusty poetry section, but later, outside, under the awning. You were both soaked, grinning, cold and full of too many words. They kissed you like they were afraid they'd misread everything, and like they didn't care if they had. You stood there for what felt like forever. Rain falling behind you, the smell of wet pavement and coffee and paperback pages clinging to your clothes. You've kissed other people since then, but not like that. Never quite like that. You remember how you'd walk home with them, passing the same 3 lampposts, the same crack in the sidewalk where the weeds grew. They'd talk about the book they were reading. You'd pretend to disagree just to hear them argue. Sometimes they'd tuck their hand into the crook of your arm like it belonged there. And sometimes you'd stop mid-sentence just to look at them. You never said why, but they knew. You used to joke about running away together to open a bookstore. "We'll name it something dramatic," you'd say, like Dog-Eared Love or The Binding. They rolled their eyes and said, "Absolutely not." Then paused. "Okay, maybe The Binding, but only if we sell tea too." You talked like that a lot, in maybes and what-ifs, in soft-spoken dreams that felt more like shared fiction. Neither of you believed it would happen, but somehow saying it made the world feel gentler, closer. And it was close, so close, until slowly it wasn't. But that part comes later. For now, you're still in the bookstore, still tracing their footsteps through your memory. still remembering the way they looked when they talked about their favorite sentence, like it was a secret spell. Still hearing their voice in your head. You take a book from the shelf. It's not Rilke this time. It's something newer, something about time and tenderness and how things fall apart in beautiful ways. You flip to a random page. It talks about longing. You don't underline it, but you wish you did. The bookstore had a small love seat tucked away in the back, one of those threadbare, sagging ones that looked like it had absorbed 1,000 quiet heartbreaks and one too many spilled chai lattes. It was the only piece of furniture in the store that didn't match anything else, and maybe that's why it felt like yours. You and they claimed it one Sunday afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained low and gray, like it couldn't quite decide if it was finished grieving. You remember how the air smelled that day. Wet wool, old dust, and cinnamon from the tiny bakery next door. They brought 2 books that afternoon, one for each of you, but you didn't read. Not really. Not in the way people pretend to. Eyes flicking across lines while your knees brushed in that narrow little corner. But every 5 minutes, one of you would lean in with something to say. A quote, a thought, an unrelated joke, and the book would fall closed in your lap again. They read out loud sometimes, just a line or 2. Their voice was soft, deliberate, like they were savoring the words, tasting each syllable before handing it to you, like a piece of candy. You never interrupted when they read aloud. You just listened and tried to look casual while your whole heart leaned forward like a sunflower towards sunlight. You told yourself you weren't falling in love, that it was just a bookstore thing, a phase, a quiet joy to keep separate from the mess of the real world. But it was Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and suddenly your calendar didn't feel like your own anymore. You brought snacks once, almond cookies in a wax paper bag. They laughed when you offered one and said, "You know we're not technically allowed to eat in here, right?" You shrugged. Rebels for literature. They took a bite and said, "These taste like falling in love." You laughed. That's a pretty big statement for an almond cookie. They looked down, then back at you with that tilted smile. I stand by it. And that was it. You knew. You didn't say it. Not then. Maybe not ever in those exact words. But you started doing things like memorizing their coffee order, or dog-earing pages they might like, or writing down sentences you didn't want to forget, just in case they asked what you'd been reading. There was a notebook you kept. You never told them about it. Just page after page of the tiny, ordinary things you loved about them. The way they always tied their scarf twice. The pause they took before starting a sentence. The way they mouthed the words when they read silently. You reread that notebook more times than you want to admit. Sometimes, when they were late, and they were always a little late, you'd sit on the love seat and stare at the front door like it owed you answers. You'd imagine them walking in, eyes scanning the shop, smile blooming as soon as they saw you. And it would happen. Every time. Like magic on a loop. You began to think the bookstore was part of the spell. That the creaking floors and warm lamplight and faint background hum of turning pages were the ingredients that made your love real. You never saw them outside of that world. Not much, anyway. You met up once for a walk through the park, but it felt strange, too bright, too open. Like love should only exist in the shadows between the shelves. so you always came back here. The reading corner, the shared silence, the books passed between you like love notes. I gave you a book once, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a thin ribbon. Inside was a collection of poems. Love poems, but not the obvious kind. The kind that ache instead of shout. On the first page they wrote, "For you, in case I ever forget how to say it out loud." You never told them, but you read that book every night for a week. And then again the week after. You remember one Sunday, the last one before things shifted, you fell asleep on the love seat. Just for a few minutes. Your head tilted toward theirs, their hand resting lightly on your knee. When you woke up, they were watching you. You said, groggily, "How long was I out?" They just smiled and said, "Long enough to dream something beautiful, I hope." You remember thinking, "I already am." That day, everything felt right. As if the world had clicked into place in that one square of floorboard. As if nothing bad could happen in a place where stories lived. And maybe that's why you didn't see the unraveling coming. Maybe you were too deep in the softness, too wrapped in shared pages and lopsided smiles, too convinced that as long as you kept coming back to the bookstore, the story would keep writing itself. You look at the love seat now. It's still there. A little more sag in the cushions, a new tear in the fabric. You sit down. It still feels like home, but the other side is empty. It wasn't one moment, not a crash, not a betrayal, no screaming in the rain, just less. Less time, less laughter, less softness. You started arriving earlier, pretending you didn't notice they were arriving later. You brought new books they never asked about. They skimmed through them, nodded, smiled politely. The jokes you used to toss back and forth like a game of catch began falling flat, hitting the ground with a quiet thud. You'd still sit together, knees touching on that old love seat, but the silence changed. It wasn't companionable anymore. It was stiff, careful, like two strangers sitting in a waiting room. You didn't know how to ask what was wrong, or maybe you did and just didn't want to hear the answer. One Sunday, they didn't show. No message, no explanation. You waited over an hour, watching the door every time it swung open, your stomach tightening with hope and loosening with disappointment. You left eventually, walked home in a drizzle that didn't even bother pretending to be romantic anymore. The next time, they came, smiled, sat beside you like nothing had happened. But it had. The rhythm was off. The timing stuttered. They looked at you less, laughed even less than that. And you kept trying. You brought their favorite cookies again, even though the shop had stopped carrying them and you had to go to 3 places. They said thank you, but they only ate half of one, left the rest on the napkin. You watched it crumble. They started bringing new books, nonfiction. sharp-edged things about war and politics and grief. You read them, even though they left your heart raw. You wanted to understand. You wanted to stay in step with them. You asked them about one of the authors. They looked surprised, like they forgot they had shared it with you. "Oh, yeah," they said. "He's kind of brilliant, isn't he?" And you nodded, even though you felt like you were being left behind. One Sunday, you reached for their hand without thinking. Just a reflex, just muscle memory. But they didn't reach back. They let your hand rest there, then slowly pulled theirs away to turn a page. They didn't notice you watching them after that, but you were. And something in you folded in half, quietly. The final visit didn't announce itself. There was no thunderclap of goodbye. No final page turned. You just remember, sitting in the corner, holding a book neither of you had spoken about, and realizing it had been an hour, and they hadn't looked up once. Not once. You said you had to go early. They nodded. No protest, no, "Already." You stood. They said, "See you next week?" And you hesitated, smiled, "Yeah." But you didn't. The bookstore is quieter now. Maybe it's your imagination. But even the floorboards seem to creak less these days. The whole place feels softer around the edges, like it's been listening all this time, and has grown tired too. You still come back sometimes. Not as often, not in hopes of running into them. That part of you has gone still. But because it feels like the last place you were honest, not just with them, with yourself. The staff has changed. The young guy with the earbuds left. Now there's a woman with bright red glasses who arranges the window display with care and sometimes hums old songs you can't name. You like her. She smiles at you with recognition, but never conversation, which is exactly right. You browse differently now, slower, more aimless. You touch the spines like old friends. You reread pages you've already memorized. You sit in the corner, still favoring that tattered love seat. It doesn't matter that the fabric is even more threadbare now, or that one of the legs wobbles. It's still yours. You wonder if they come here anymore. You don't ask. You never see their ghost, not exactly. But sometimes you catch the shape of them, in a scarf on a stranger, in the shadow of someone pausing near the poetry shelf. Your heart doesn't leap anymore, not like it used to. It just nods quietly and says, "I remember." Once, you found a book tucked into the wrong section, a tiny paperback, clearly misplaced. You opened it out of habit, and there it was. Their handwriting. Just one line, scrawled across the inside cover. "I hope you're still reading." It could have been for anyone. Could have been written years ago. But your fingers trembled anyway. You didn't buy it. You left it there, like a message in a bottle for someone else to find. Because maybe this place isn't just a graveyard. Maybe it's a mailbox too. You no longer believe in grand returns. or second chances shaped like lightning bolts, but you do believe in memory, in the way a smell or sentence can drag you back through time. And you believe in love still. Not the loud kind, but the kind that lingers, that hums beneath your ribs when you least expect it. Sometimes, when the bookstore is almost empty and the rain is starting up again outside, you close your eyes and imagine what it would feel like if they walked in, just casually, like no time had passed. Maybe they'd pause in the doorway, like they always did, letting their eyes adjust. Maybe they'd spot you across the room and smile in that quiet way of theirs, like they were seeing something they didn't think they'd see again. And maybe, just maybe, you'd smile back. But you never open your eyes during those moments. You let it stay a dream, a flicker, a kindness to yourself. Because some stories aren't meant to continue. Some just sit on the shelf, waiting to be remembered. And you remember them every time the rain begins to fall. You can rest now. Nothing more is asked of you. Not tonight. You've walked through memories that still hold warmth, even if they ache a little. Some love doesn't vanish. It just lives quietly in the corners of places like this, in the sound of rain on glass, in the turn of a page, in the way your name was once spoken by someone who meant it. You don't need to fix anything tonight. You don't need to rewrite the ending. Let the story be what it was, honest, imperfect, beautiful in its time. You're still that person who loved deeply, who paid attention, who showed up. That's what stays. Let your thoughts settle now, like dust on the shelves. Let the light dim around the memory, not to erase it, but to rest beside it. The rain will keep falling. The bookstore will still be there. Sweet dreams.